This is the Energy Makers Show, featuring the innovators, financiers, and policymakers focused on the global energy demand. Brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward. And here's your host, Russ Capper.
Hi, I'm Russ Capper, and welcome to another episode of the Energy Makers Show. Today, featuring highlights from our first 6 months of 2013. Highlights from three of our most popular guests. First up, Dr. Kenneth Medlock III, the Energy Fellow at Rice University's Baker Institute. He'll be followed by John Calaway, a founding partner and director of development with Pattern Energy. And lastly, Dr. Michael Economides, global energy consultant with a PhD in Petroleum Engineering from Stanford University, author of 15 books focused on energy, and professor of chemical and biomolecular engineering at the University of Houston. All of that right after this.
At BKD, we understand the constantly shifting nature of the energy industry. As a national CPA and advisory firm, we serve energy clients from the beginning to the end of the cycle. Our experienced energy advisors serve approximately 300 energy companies in exploration, midstream, downstream, oilfield services, and power production. Plus, we're the largest North American member of the Praxity Global Alliance, which means we can help you wherever you operate. Contact a BKD advisor or visit us online to learn more.
This is the Energy Makers Show, brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward. And now, back to the Energy Makers Show with your host, Russ Capper.
Welcome back to the Energy Makers Show. We kick off this highlight episode with two excerpts from episode number 90, when Dr. Kenneth Medlock III was our guest. And we enter the discussion where Ken and I were talking about the incredible transformation that was taking place in the oil and gas production throughout the United States over the past few years. And Ken starts explaining the unique cause of this transformation.
It's a little different than sort of things of the past, if you will. A lot of times people like to think back to the 1980s when the North Sea really started to come into its own. First production came on in the mid-'70s, but it really started to grow then. And that was a transformative event for global oil markets. But in this case, you're talking about a resource that geologists have known about for a long time. It really was always just an issue of technology. How do we make it technically and commercially feasible? Thanks to some innovations that really owe their roots to some things that were done during a Carter administration program called the Eastern Gas Shales Project, migrating on into the private sector, and then eventually George Mitchell taking them into the field. We are where we are today. And that's the remarkable thing about energy and transformations in general. Anytime you can remove the geologic uncertainty to an extent and really boil it down to technology, the entire question is entirely different, right? It really is about how do we make it work. It becomes a scientific issue rather than an issue of uncertainty.
Okay, further into the interview, we had moved to the topic of the far-reaching impact of energy in the overall economy.
I have a colleague here at Rice who is a macroeconomist by training, and he put it very well. A lot of the sort of broad macroeconomic thinking really didn't incorporate energy into the modeling work that was going on to inform policy, to inform things like more generally tax policy and monetary policy, things of this nature. But when you think about why that is, it's because generally energy, in terms of its share of GDP, gross domestic product, or the economy, if you will, it's 3 to 4%, right? So it's a pretty small fraction. Right. So a lot of times it's just arbitrarily dismissed as being too small to matter. But at the end of the day, if you don't have energy, everything shuts down, right? So it's infinitely more important than just its share of GDP. So he really got interested in energy because he wanted to incorporate that facet into macroeconomic modeling. And in a lot of ways, the fact that there's been this tremendous amount of thinking that's gone on in the macroeconomic sort of frameworks that has ignored energy sort of really tells you a lot about why the general public may not really fully appreciate its value, if you will. But it certainly is important. And of course, there's a lot of work that's gone on looking at the effect of energy prices on economic activity because it affects consumer budgets. And so that's where you cycle back into the production aspect, right? Because ultimately, when prices rise, it should signal investment opportunities so that you actually see new production coming online and supplies come up, and that will tend to keep prices from rising anymore at the very least, maybe even fall. So all of those things matter for a variety of reasons. On the production side, it is economic activity. It's an industrial activity, so it provides jobs. It creates economic opportunities in areas. I mean, you look at Pennsylvania, you look at West Texas, you look at South Texas. There's a lot of areas now that coming out of 2008 were in the doldrums that are boom towns, right? And all that owes itself to what's happening on the energy production side. And then, of course, it's bringing new supply to market. It's creating up other opportunities. It's keeping a lid on energy prices. Of course, natural gas prices in North America are very, very low relative to the rest of the world, which is triggering a lot of activity in terms of industrial expansion. And that, of course, creates jobs and creates economic opportunities, creates opportunities to shift the balance of trade in this country so that the dollar has a different standing relative to other currencies. And so all these knock-on effects, right, which are kind of hard to quantify, to be honest.
Other than they're huge.
No, that's exactly right. And I think it's one of those experiments that you don't really know until you know, right, what the full impact is. But I think most people who are on the ground today, and particularly in the areas where you're seeing a lot of this development occur, they fully appreciate what's happening because their livelihoods are changed dramatically as a result of it.
Okay, we'll be back with more highlights after this.
Welcome to another episode of The Future of Water and Unconventionals, brought to you by IHS and CAP Resources.
Hello, I'm Marcus Gay with IHS.
And I'm Laura Capper of CAP Resources.
We've seen a number of interesting trends in the water technology development space right now. Laura, what have you been seeing?
Well, the industry's been through a lot of shifts in the 5 or 6 years. It's been kind of fun to follow that. I think initially many of us were focused on a holy grail of water treatment where we could take dirty water, purify it, and return it right back to the environment, and that really didn't prove feasible at that time. And I think we've since figured out it's not just the treatment, it's the environmental implications of moving that water around. So we're seeing a lot more novelty in the way that water is being sourced and provided, how that water is being moved around and stored. Once it's used, treatment is obviously quite critical. And then what do you do with it afterwards? Do you keep it in an injection well or put it down into an injection well where it's essentially out of the water cycle? Or are there novel things you can do to actually keep it within that water cycle?
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, that's a great overview of the maybe the full life cycle of the water value chain. One thing I might add to that is that within just the treatment space itself, I think there's a number of things. There's an evolution towards on-site reuse, minimalistic treatment essentially of fluids to then be used back downhole for hydraulic fracturing. And also the operating industry has been bringing to the market a number of very novel and interesting friction reducers and gel frac chemistries that have really reduced the need for water treatment. These are two areas that I think are very interesting to continue watching.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic that it's actually novel new chemistries that are allowing us to be more environmentally conscious.
Water management is complex and continuing to evolve. We look forward to following this market.
So check back for more on water management and market opportunities.
And for more information on water management strategies and water market opportunities in the continental U.S., go to ihs.com/waterunconventionals. This is the Energy Makers Show, brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward. And now back to the Energy Makers Show with your host, Russ Capper.
Welcome back to the Energy Makers Show, continuing on with highlights from our most popular interviews from the first 6 months of 2013. Up next, John Calaway, founding partner and director of development with Pattern Energy. We enter the interview with Paul Dickerson asking John to tell us about the company, followed by John describing his diverse energy industry background.
Well, Pattern Energy is a large independent power producer that is focused on wind energy particularly and renewable energy. So we also dabble in and are growing as well in solar energy, but primarily we are a wind energy producer.
Well, and not just a producer, you develop the projects. I mean, you're
right.
All things.
We do. We really start from the very beginning, which is really the atmospheric science. We do the land acquisition. We do a lot of all the environmental permitting. We do the financing, construction, operations, and really kind of beginning to end.
Soup to nuts.
That's right.
All right, so how much power are you producing?
Currently, we are producing nearly 1,500 megawatts on the ground, and I anticipate being up to nearly 2,000 megawatts by the end of the year. Under many projects under construction. So that, kind of in a ballpark of over 1 million homes on average are served with completely clean energy from our wind production.
Would you mind sharing with the audience some of your entrepreneurial background?
I came out of the oil business, exploration and production, spent 20 years doing that, built a company, took it public, retired from the industry and
to do something pretty cool.
To make art. Yeah, I'm kind of a creative person by nature. So I like to make art, but I missed the business world, really. I miss working with people and really smart people. So I came back in through seeing wind in Europe, in Spain. Actually, I was in the Bilbao at the Guggenheim, driving to Barcelona and saw my first huge large wind farm, and I just was fascinated by it. Inspired, and came back and started getting in the business. And everybody looked at me like I was crazy, but it's been the best thing that ever happened to me. It's just been being part of building an industry, really setting the policies of the industry, setting standards for the industry. It's kind of like being in the oil business back when old Killam would throw flour out of the back of a plane and say, go drill right there, It has a little bit of that feeling. It's getting less that way now, but it certainly feels great.
So are there others who've made this transition from traditional energy over to renewables?
There's a few, not many. I am a little bit of a lone wolf in this, but I will say that there are a lot of things that I learned in the oil and gas business that were really applicable to what I'm doing in renewables. I mean, you think about geologists, we hire meteorologists, so we're not into earth scientists, we're into atmospheric sciences.
Right.
And by the way, in our company, that is really one of our most important part of our company is we have a great atmospheric science department. We have 500 inline computers running 24/7 doing modeling of all this. And so, all that experience I had with land acquisitions, with, transmission, which is like pipelines, and, construction and finance and risk assessment, all that, there's great similarities between it. It's amazing, thinking about prospects. That's what I do. I'm a prospect originator. That's what I do for Pattern, is originate projects that have a reasonable chance of being successful.
Energy's energy.
Energy's energy.
All right, a little bit later in the discussion, Paul asked John to talk about the impact of inexpensive natural gas.
Well, I was excited to have you on because, especially now with all of this inexpensive natural gas, there are some in the renewable industry and some of those who finance the renewable industry that have had concerns about, all right, what is cheap natural gas going to do to the wind market? Mm-hmm. Well, what's your take?
Well, I mean, I think it's true that it is having an impact on us. Certainly, the perception of endless abundance of natural gas, it does affect how utilities plan. Right. It does affect how governments react to mandates. It does have an impact also on forward-looking power prices. So, as you know, a lot of the power pricing and hedging and structuring, financial structuring, is around heat rates and natural gas prices. So obviously the perception of endless low-cost gas is not particularly a great motivator for renewables at this time.
And we wrap up Paul's discussion with John Calaway, where Paul asked John about innovation in wind energy that's taken place over his years in the space.
I do think that we've been making up for it by huge innovations in the actual turbines. So, when I first started, a 40-meter rotor for a wind turbine length of the
right.
would be considered huge. Now we're installing 113-meter rotors, which is longer than a football field,
Right.
And so we're able to capture so much more energy than we were, and much more efficiently per unit installed. So that's really helping us to drive the price, continue to drive the price down. And even with low gas prices in some of the areas like the Panhandle and up in the Dakotas, some of these fantastic natural resources are 50% capacity factors, which is hard to imagine from wind.
Okay, we'll be back with more highlights from the first 6 months of 2013 after this.
Welcome to this edition of The Power of People, where we explore how to bring out the best in your most valuable asset. I'm Robin Knowles, President and CEO at TDS, the Workforce Performance Experts. Today we're talking with Steve Skarke, Executive Vice President of Kaneka North America, about the critical role first-line supervisors have in our organizations. Thanks for joining us, Steve.
It's great to be here, Robin.
Steve, as a senior leader, you know firsthand the importance of frontline supervisors. Tell me about their effectiveness.
So it's very important. They have a big influence on the workforce. In fact, we know that the reason most employees are not committed to their team or why they leave organizations is because they don't feel appreciated by their immediate supervisor or they're not recognized for their contributions. So we as senior managers have to reinforce that by providing management training and also leadership behavioral training.
Those frontline supervisors are so important. What's senior leadership to do?
So it's up to us to commit to provide those resources, both in development tools such as assessments, coaching, and a strong leadership development process to reinforce those right behaviors of leadership and to hold them accountable for the expectations that we set in our business plans.
That definitely sounds important for business.
Absolutely. The first-line supervisors become the critical link in that chain for translating our business plans into actionable tasks for their team. And so by doing that, they're able to support our plans, and we can see that in our key performance indicators such as safety, quality, and productivity.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Steve.
Thank you.
This has been another edition of The Power of People. Join us next time to learn more about how you can develop excellence in your workforce while getting the best possible ROI from your human capital.
This is the EnergyMakers Show, brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward. And now, back to the EnergyMakers Show with your host, Russ Capper.
Welcome back to the EnergyMakers Show and highlights from the first half of 2013. And lastly, we're going to feature excerpts from my interview with Dr. Michael Economides. We entered the discussion with Michael sharing his perspective on how he thinks energy and the energy industry should be viewed by the people.
My thought has been that energy and energy abundance should actually be the most populist of all issues. It should be a Democrat issue. It should not be delegated to the right-wing fringes of the Republican Party, okay, like some people are thinking. It shouldn't be any different than the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the food we eat, okay? I always tell people, look, if you take the energy industry worldwide, you bunch it all together. The oil and gas industry, not just, the term energy means silly things, like solar and wind and so on.
Right.
Let's talk about the oil industry, oil and gas. You put them together, it's the biggest economic entity other than the United States. So in other words, think of Exxon as one of the 20 largest countries in the world. Okay, that's the size of it, all right. And so you look at the energy industry and you say, my God, how much more do you want? I mean, you have millions of jobs depending on the oil industry. The other day, somebody calculated for me that petroleum technology is something like a $20 billion a year export industry. Technology, okay? I'm talking about tubulars right now, tools, drilling rigs, technology in general. So, I mean, that's a huge asset.
And we wrap up our highlights with Michael Economides giving his view on the incredible transformation of energy in the United States brought on by American innovation in shale exploration and development.
The production of natural gas from shale is arguably the biggest and best story in the history of the American oil and gas business the last 50 years. Okay, I mean, no doubt about that. I mean, this is an extraordinary feat. Going back to my high box that I am preaching right now is that this is again now use the same word, the quintessentially American character, the can-do attitude, innovation, private industry taking the lead, letting the economy function as it does without government interference. You put all of these things together, truly shale gas should be one of the best stories, not just energy stories, but one of the best stories that an American would be proud of. Okay, in other words, it's great application of technology, great economic decision making, great can-do attitude. Put a lot of these things, the accolades are just endless, okay, of what happened.
And that wraps up this Energy Maker show, heard on the radio and seen right here at TheEnergyMakers.com.